The dress was the color of mist. Lily had spent 3 weeks sewing every stitch with a fine needle, hunched over the wooden table in the small back room of her father's house, her fingers numb and her eyes burning in the light of a single candle. It was not a noble woman's dress. It had no gold thread embroidery, no imported lace from the northern territories. But it was honest. It was hers. And when she put it on that evening and looked at her reflection in the polished metal mirror, she felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel. Hope. The grand gathering of clans happened once every 3 years, and the council's stone hall was decorated as she had never seen it before. Clan banners hung from the oak beams, each one carrying the colors and symbols of the oldest families in the region. Torches along the walls cast amber light over the faces of wolves of every kind, from warriors in plain armor to advisors wearing mantles lined with dark fur. The smell was a thick blend of burning resin, wine spilled over old wood, and the unmistakable scent of dozens of wolves gathered in a single enclosed space. Lily entered through the side corridor, not the main entrance. She never used the main entrance. Daughter of Gareth, a beta of a minor clan with no land and no title, she had learned since childhood where her place was, at the margins. Close enough to see, far enough not to interfere. But tonight was different. Tonight, Connor had promised. Connor Voss, son of Alpha Voss, leader of the Grey River Pack, dark-haired and broad-shouldered with a smile that knew exactly what it was doing whenever it landed on someone. 3 months ago, on a thin rain afternoon when the two of them were alone at the edge of the creek separating his lands from no one's lands, he had promised that at this gathering he would present her before everyone, that he would choose her. "I'm going to pull you out of the margins, Lily," he had said, his hand at her jaw. This time for real. She had believed him. And she hated herself a little for it, but she had believed him. Now she moved through the hall in her mist-colored dress with her shoulders straight, searching for his face among the crowd. Her friend Petra, short and red-haired and with the sharpest tongue in the pack, walked beside her and squeezed her arm once, firm. "He's near the east corridor," Petra said in a low voice. "With his father." Lily nodded, breathed deeply. The smell of resin was too strong, almost nauseating. She found Connor exactly where Petra had said, and for a moment her heart lurched in that idiotic and inconvenient way she had tried to train it out of. He looked well, as always, with the dark blue mantle of his clan over his shoulders, and the confident expression of someone who knew he belonged in that hall. His eyes landed on her, and then, for a fraction of a second, she saw something pass across that face. Discomfort. She stopped. Her fingers tightened against the fold of her dress without her noticing. "Connor," she said, when she was close enough. "Lily." His voice was normal, polite. The voice one uses with someone not important enough for caution, but important enough for courtesy. Beside him, a young woman Lily had not seen before smiled faintly. Tall, pale-skinned, with a silver necklace bearing the crest of the Pine Valley clan at her throat. Connor's father stood 2 steps behind, arms crossed, with the expression of a man who had made a decision and was waiting for his son to deliver it without causing a scene. Lily understood before Connor even opened his mouth, but he opened it anyway. "I needed to speak with you before the ceremony," he said, in a tone that tried to be gentle and managed only to be condescending. "Things have changed. My father and Alpha Pine Ridge reached an arrangement. Seraphine and I," he made a brief gesture toward the pale-skinned young woman, "will be formally presented tonight as bonded companions." The hall continued around her. The torches kept burning. Someone laughed loudly on the other side of the room. "I understand," Lily said. And it was the cruelest thing she could have said. Not to him, but to herself. Because it was true. She understood. She had understood from the beginning. She had simply chosen not to believe what she understood. "You'll find someone more suited to your—" Connor began. "You don't need to," she said. She turned. She walked. The crowd seemed to grow around her as she moved away, and she kept her chin up and her shoulders back, because the only thing she still possessed in that moment was the manner in which she left. Petra appeared at her side within seconds, face flushed and fists clenched, but Lily pressed her arm before any word came out. "Don't," Lily said quietly. "Lily. Don't, Petra." She would not cry in that hall. She would not give a single face in that room the satisfaction of watching Gareth's daughter fall apart at the grand gathering of clans. She had entered through the side corridor, and she would leave through the same, quiet and invisible as she had arrived. She was 3 steps from the exit when she heard the sound change. It was not a loud noise. It was the opposite. It was a silence that opened in the middle of the crowd like a blade through fabric, spreading from the main entrance toward the center of the hall. The conversations died one by one, from the door inward, like torches being extinguished in sequence. Lily stopped without meaning to. She was not the only one. The entire hall had stopped. 3 men walked in through the main doors. The first was enormous, with shoulders that seemed to occupy the space of 2 people, dark hair cut close, and an expression of permanent amusement on his face, as though the entire world were a private joke of which only he knew the ending. The second was leaner, younger, with pale eyes and a half-smile that seemed to assess every person in the hall and had already reached a conclusion about all of them. The third one did not smile. He was tall, taller than the other 2, and he moved with that specific quality Lily had only seen once or twice in her life, in wolves who were very old and very powerful. The quality of something that does not need to prove anything, because the very space around it adjusts its weight to accommodate him. Dark hair, a thin scar running down from his left jaw, eyes the color of burnt amber. He wore black, no ornament, no embroidery, no visible clan symbol. And that detail, the absence of a symbol where everyone else had one, was the most unsettling detail of all. Because it meant he did not need one. "The king's sons," Petra whispered beside Lily, in a voice that had entirely lost its usual edge of irony. "The 3 Sable brothers. The broad one is Prince Dorian, the younger is Prince Cale, and the tall one is—" "Aiden," said someone nearby, in a murmur that passed through the hall like wind moving through leaves. "The Alpha King." Lily had heard the name. Every wolf had heard it. Aiden Sable, Alpha King of the United Northern Territories, ruler of 19 packs. The man who had ended the War of 3 Rivers before the age of 30. He did not attend regional grand gatherings. He never had. His presence here was, in itself, an unprecedented event. Lily realized she had stopped walking entirely. She was standing in the middle of the side corridor, 3 steps from the exit, in her mist-colored dress with eyes that were burning, but that she still refused to let overflow. And then Aiden Sable's gaze swept the hall. She should not have been visible. She was never visible. She was the daughter of a landless beta, the woman who had been publicly rejected less than 2 minutes ago, the person who was trying to leave through the side door without anyone noticing. But his eyes stopped. They stopped on her. For how long? She could not have said. Perhaps 3 seconds. Perhaps less. But they were 3 seconds in which the Alpha King looked directly at Lily with those burnt amber eyes, and something in his still expression shifted in a way she could not name. The broad-shouldered Prince, Dorian, leaned slightly toward his brother and said something in a low voice. Aiden did not respond. He kept looking. Lily turned and walked out through the side door. The cold night air hit her like a clean blow, carrying the smell of wet earth and pine resin, and she finally allowed her chin to drop 1 inch. Just 1 inch. Petra came out behind her and stood in silence for a moment, looking up at the sky where a few weak stars were visible between the clouds. "You saw him looking at you," Petra said. It was not a question. "I did," Lily said. "The Alpha King was—" "Petra. Fine. But Petra's voice had that vibrating quality it got when she was trying not to say something important. "It's just that wolves at that level don't look at someone without a reason, Lily." Lily did not answer. She looked at the dark line of the forest beyond the courtyard walls, at the ancient dense trees that began where the torches stopped casting light. She breathed the cold air. Whatever that look had been, it changed nothing. She had been rejected. The dress she had sewn for 3 weeks was still on her body, and no one had noticed the work in each stitch. And the only man in that hall who had truly looked at her was the only one she could never reach. But there was something strange and quiet inside her, like a small ember that does not go out in the wind. The feeling that those amber eyes had seen her, not the beta's daughter, not the dress without embroidery. Her. She did not sleep that night. Lily lay on the narrow cot in the room she shared with nothing but her sewing kit and the memory of Connor's voice, staring at the ceiling beams while the sounds of the gathering drifted through the stone walls in waves. Music, laughter, the occasional eruption of raised voices that meant someone had drunk too much or challenged the wrong person. The ordinary sounds of a world that had moved on from her humiliation without pausing to acknowledge it. That was perhaps the worst part. Not the rejection itself, but the speed at which it became irrelevant to everyone except her. Petra had stayed with her until past midnight, sitting on the edge of the cot and talking about everything and nothing, the way she always did when she was trying to fill silence that might otherwise become dangerous. Lily had let her talk, had nodded at the right moments, had accepted the cup of watered wine Petra pressed into her hands, and drank it without tasting it. When Petra finally left, promising to return in the morning with bread and sharp opinions, Lily had been alone with the dark, and the distant music, and the dress hanging on the wall peg, still the color of mist, still honest, still hers. She thought about the amber eyes. She told herself not to think about the amber eyes. She thought about them anyway. Morning came gray and cold, with a low mist rolling in from the forest that made the courtyard look like something out of an old story. Lily rose before the rest of the guest quarters had stirred, washed her face in the basin of cold water, and put on her plain brown wool dress, the one that made her invisible again. The mist-colored dress she folded carefully and placed at the bottom of her small pack. She had a letter to send. It had been written 3 weeks ago, before the gathering, before Connor's promise had solidified into something she had almost let herself count on. In a moment of what she now recognized as either courage or stupidity, she had written to the steward of the Northern administration, requesting a formal review of her father's land claim. Gareth had worked a small plot on the eastern boundary for 11 years, without deed or title, and the new boundary surveys threatened to erase even that. The letter was careful, precise, and written in the formal language she had taught herself from borrowed books. Because if she was going to ask for something she had no right to expect, she was at least going to ask properly. The problem was the address. The Northern administration had 2 offices: the Regional Steward's Office, which handled minor land disputes for the Eastern Territories, and the Crown Correspondence Office, which handled matters escalated directly to the King's Council. The Regional Steward's address was written in faded ink in the correspondence ledger her father kept in a cracked leather folder. Lily had copied it carefully, but the ledger was old, and the ink had bled at the edges, and the district seal she had used on the envelope had been borrowed from a neighbor who was not entirely certain it was the correct one. She walked to the courier post at the edge of the courtyard in the early morning mist, handed the letter to the half-asleep boy behind the wooden counter, paid the 2 copper coins for the seal and the root, and walked away before she could change her mind. She did not know then that she had written the wrong district number in the address, that the letter, instead of traveling south to the regional steward's modest office in Halvanmore, would travel north, carried by 3 relay riders across the stone roads of the Upper Territories, directly to the Crown Correspondence Office at the seat of the Alpha King's court. She did not know any of that yet. What she did know, 2 hours later, was that Connor Voss was walking toward her across the courtyard with an expression she had not seen on his face before, something caught between guilt and calculation, which was in many ways worse than either alone. Lily had been sitting on the low stone wall near the east gate, eating the bread Petra had brought, and watching the morning mist dissolve against the warming stone of the hall. She saw him coming, and had exactly enough time to decide not to stand up, which was a small decision, but felt important. Lily. He stopped a few feet away. He was not wearing his clan mantle this morning. Without it, he looked younger, and somehow less certain of himself, which she suspected was not an accident. "Connor," she said. I wanted to explain more clearly than I did last night. You were clear enough last night. He exhaled, ran a hand through his dark hair. It wasn't my choice. My father and Alpha Pine Ridge have been negotiating this arrangement for over a year. I didn't know how to... Tell me? She looked at him steadily. You had 3 months, Connor. You made a promise with 3 months to find the words, and you chose not to use them. He had the decency to look away. I know. Then there's nothing left to explain. She took another piece of bread and ate it, which she was privately very proud of, because her hands were not shaking, and her voice had not broken, and the bread tasted like nothing, but she chewed it anyway, like it was the most ordinary morning of her life. Connor stood there for a moment longer, and she could feel him wanting something from her. Absolution, perhaps, or anger, or tears, something that would let him leave feeling resolved. She gave him none of those things. He left. Petra, who had been leaning against the wall 6 feet away with her arms crossed, and the expression of someone physically restraining herself, let out a long, slow breath. You're terrifying, you know that. I'm eating bread, Lily said. That's what I mean. The gathering ran for 3 days. Lily spent the remainder of it on the periphery, which was where she had always operated best anyway. She helped with the serving rotation on the second evening, because it kept her hands busy and her mind quiet, and because it placed her in the hall without requiring her to be seen as a guest with expectations. It was during the second evening that she saw Aiden Sable again. She was carrying a tray of wine cups from the preparation room toward the main table when she came around the corner of the inner corridor and found the passage partially blocked. 2 of the King's Guard stood at attention on either side, and between them, leaning against the stone wall with his arms crossed and his eyes on the narrow window that looked out over the dark courtyard, was the Alpha King. He was alone, or as alone as he ever was, which was not truly alone, but he was not in the hall, not at the main table accepting toasts and formal greetings. He was standing in a corridor, in the dark, looking out a window at the night. Lily stopped, calculated the distance and the options. There was no other route to the main table that would not take her back through the preparation room and around the long way, which would mean the wine arriving late, and the head server noticing, and the question of why she had gone the long way. She walked forward. The guards tracked her. She felt their attention like a physical weight, but kept her pace even and her eyes on the end of the corridor. She was nobody. She was carrying wine. She was passing through. She was 2 steps past him when his voice came. Low, unhurried, like stone that has been warm all day. You're the woman from last night. Lily stopped. She turned, because not turning would have been its own kind of statement, and she was not in the business of making statements she couldn't support. I was in the hall last night, yes, she said. He had turned from the window. The torchlight from the far sconce caught the line of his jaw, and the scar beneath it, and the amber of his eyes. And she was close enough now to understand that what she had read as coldness from across the hall was not coldness at all. It was stillness. There was a difference. You left quickly, he said. I had finished what I came to do, she said, which was not entirely a lie. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile exactly. The territory just before a smile, perhaps, where a decision was being made about whether the situation warranted one. Did you? He said. It was not quite a question. Lily adjusted her grip on the tray and looked at him directly, because she had already lost everything available to lose in the last 24 hours, and direct eye contact with an Alpha King was not going to make the morning worse. My lord, she said, with a small nod that was respectful, but not diminishing. She turned and walked to the end of the corridor, and through the door into the hall, where the noise and the warmth and the smell of roasting meat swallowed her immediately. Her heart was hammering. She set the tray down at the table, distributed the cups with steady hands, and did not look back toward the corridor. But she heard, beneath the noise of the hall and the crackling of the fire and the voices of 19 clans talking all at once, the quiet sound of boots on stone, unhurried, moving in no particular direction, or perhaps moving in every direction at once. She could not be certain. The letter arrived at the wrong place on the 4th day after the gathering. Lily did not know this yet. She was home by then, back in the small eastern house with the cracked window frame and the garden that her father kept meaning to fix and never did. Resuming the quiet rhythm of a life that had always been defined more by its absences than its presences. No title, no clan standing, no prospect that anyone had bothered to name aloud in years. Gareth said nothing about the gathering when she returned. He was a man who communicated primarily through silence, and his particular silence on the subject of Connor Voss told her everything she needed to know about how much he had allowed himself to hope on her behalf. She made soup. He ate it. They sat across from each other in the orange light of the hearth, and the silence between them was not unkind, just heavy with all the things fathers and daughters accumulate over years of not quite saying what they mean. Petra visited the following afternoon and sat at the kitchen table with both elbows on the wood and her chin in her hands, and watched Lily mend a torn hem with the expression of someone composing a very important speech. "Say it," Lily said, without looking up from the needle. "I'm just thinking," Petra said. "You're not just thinking. You have a specific thought and you're deciding how to present it." Petra was quiet for another moment. Then, "The Alpha King's younger brother asked about you." The needle paused. Lily did not look up immediately, which she considered a personal victory. "Asked what?" she said. "Asked who you were. To one of the serving coordinators, apparently, after the second evening." Petra's voice was carefully neutral, which meant she was very much not feeling neutral. "He described you as the woman in the gray dress who walked through the inner corridor." Lily set the hem down on the table. "Petra, I'm just telling you what was told to me." "Which was told to you by whom?" "Marin, who heard it from the coordinator, who was very flustered about the whole thing and couldn't stop talking about it." Petra paused. "She also said that the Alpha King himself had asked the same question, separately, an hour earlier." The hearth fire crackled. Outside, the wind moved through the pine trees with a sound like low conversation. "That doesn't mean anything," Lily said. "Lily, but men of that rank notice things the way they notice furniture in a room they're passing through. It's observation, not interest. They catalog everything because that's how they maintain control of their environment." Petra stared at her. "You have a remarkable ability to talk yourself out of things that are happening directly in front of you." "I have a remarkable ability to be realistic," Lily said, picking up the needle again. "Which is a skill that has served me considerably better than hoping." Petra did not argue further, but she stayed for another 2 hours and helped braid the dried herbs hanging near the window, and the comfortable ordinariness of it helped Lily breathe more evenly than she had since the night of the gathering. The letter had arrived at the Crown Correspondence Office on the 3rd morning after dispatch. The clerk who received it was a meticulous man named Oswin, 30 years in the King's administrative service, who had developed over those decades a finely tuned instinct for distinguishing between the letters that required standard routing and the letters that required immediate attention. He read Lily's letter twice. The formal language was correct, almost unusually so for a petition of this type and origin. The land claim was legitimate on its face. The routing was wrong, clearly, a minor district address error that had sent it north instead of south. Standard procedure would have been to redirect it to the regional steward in Halvanmore with a correction note. Oswin had begun writing the correction note when the door to the correspondence room opened and the Alpha King walked in. This was not, strictly speaking, unusual. Aidan Sable had an irregular habit of passing through the administrative offices in the early morning, a practice that unnerved most of the staff considerably, but that Oswin had long since made peace with. The king looked at things. He read things. He asked precise questions and expected precise answers. Oswin had learned to simply continue working and answer when asked. "What's that?" Aidan said. Not asked. Said. He was looking at the letter on Oswin's desk from across the room. "Misdirected petition, my lord. Land claim from the Eastern Boundary Territories. I'm preparing the redirect to Halvanmore." There was a pause. "Let me see it." Oswin handed it over without expression. Aidan read it standing, which he always did. He read it once, which usually meant he had retained it entirely, and then he stood with it in his hand for a moment in the way he stood when something was processing behind those amber eyes that would not be visible until he chose to make it so. "Gareth of the Eastern Boundary," he said. "A beta, my lord. Minor holding, no formal deed. The boundary survey would displace the claim. It's been 11 years. Yes, my lord." Another pause. Longer this time. "Who wrote this letter?" Oswin blinked. "The petition is signed by Gareth, my lord." The letter was not written by Gareth. Aidan set it on the desk and looked at Oswin with a directness that always made Oswin feel as though his own thoughts were being read with mild interest. "The hand is different from the signature. The formal language is self-taught, not schooled, but precise. Someone spent considerable effort on this." Oswin looked at the letter with new attention. The king was correct, as he generally was about things Oswin had not thought to notice. "I couldn't say who, my lord." Aidan was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that made Oswin set down his quill and look up with carefully maintained professional composure. "Don't redirect it," Aidan said. "I'll reply directly." The reply came to Lily's house on a gray morning 12 days after the gathering, carried by a rider in dark livery, who knocked 3 times on the door, with the particular precision of someone who had been told to deliver something and expected it to be received appropriately. Lily opened the door in her working dress with flour on her hands, because she had been making bread, and the rider held out a sealed letter with a black wax seal that bore an impression she recognized immediately and completely failed to process for approximately 4 seconds. "The Crown and Wolf of the Sable House. For the household of Gareth of the Eastern Boundary," the writer said. "Response to correspondence received by the Crown Office." Lily took the letter. The writer left. She stood in the doorway with flour on her hands, and the letter in them, and the cold morning air coming in around her, until her father appeared behind her and said, "Who was that?" And she turned and said, "I'm not certain," which was the truest answer she had. She sat at the table and broke the seal carefully and read. The letter was short. It was written in a hand that was precise and slightly compressed. The handwriting of someone who thought faster than they wrote, and had learned to make each word carry weight accordingly. "To the household of Gareth, Eastern Boundary, territory of Halvanmore. Your petition has been received and reviewed. The 11-year occupancy establishes sufficient grounds for formal title review under the Northern Land Accord, Article 7. A survey team will be dispatched within 30 days to assess and record the claim. There is a secondary matter. The letter accompanying this petition was noted for the quality of its construction. If the author of that letter is resident at this address, I would ask that they remain available for further correspondence. Stay right there." A.S. Lily read it twice, then a third time, very slowly. "Stay right there." 2 words that could mean administrative convenience. 2 words that could mean something entirely beyond what she was allowing herself to consider. 2 words written by a man who, by all accounts, did not waste words. She set the letter on the table and looked at it. Her father came and read it over her shoulder, and was silent for a long time. Then he said, in a voice she had not heard from him in years, a voice that was quieter and more careful than his usual one, "Lily, what did you write in that letter?" "Just the petition," she said. "Just the petition," he repeated. They looked at each other. Outside, the wind moved through the pines again, and the sound it made was different this time, or perhaps she was different, because for the first time in 12 days, the ember inside her that she had been carefully not tending did something she had not given it permission to do. It grew. The survey team arrived 26 days later. There were 4 of them, official men in dark wool coats bearing the small crown insignia of the Northern Administration on their left breast, carrying measuring ropes and boundary stakes and a leather satchel of documentation that they spread across Gareth's kitchen table with the careful efficiency of people who did this regularly and expected cooperation. They were polite. They were thorough. They recorded everything. The lead surveyor, a compact man with graying temples named Aldrich, handed Gareth the preliminary assessment before they left, and told him the formal deed would be processed within 60 days. Gareth held the paper with both hands and said nothing. But his jaw worked in a way that Lily had only seen twice before in her life. Once when her mother died, and once when the old Alpha Voss had dismissed his boundary appeal 11 years ago in front of a room full of witnesses. After the surveyors left, Gareth sat down in his chair by the hearth and stayed there for a long time. Lily made tea and put it beside him and went back to the garden. She was there when the second rider came. This one was alone and did not carry administrative livery. He wore plain dark riding clothes and the kind of controlled stillness in the saddle that suggested military background, and he handed Lily a letter with the same black wax seal as the first without ceremony or explanation. Then he dismounted and led his horse to the water trough as though he fully expected to wait. Lily looked at the letter, looked at the rider, went inside. She sat at the table and opened it. The deed process is underway and requires no further action from your household. This letter concerns a separate matter. I will be traveling through the Eastern Territories in 9 days on inspection of the boundary agreements. The route passes within 2 hours of Halvanmore. If you are willing, I would speak with you directly. Send your answer with the rider. If the answer is no, that will be respected without consequence. A.S. Lily read it 4 times. The thing that struck her, the thing she kept returning to on each reading, was not the invitation itself, but the last line. If the answer is no, that will be respected without consequence. She had received requests from men of rank before, minor officials and clan adjutants, and once an overly confident Gamma who had cornered her at a market, and none of them had ever considered it necessary to include that particular assurance. Because it had never occurred to them that no was a possible answer. Aidan Sable had not only considered it, he had written it down and sealed it with his housemark. She sat with that for a while. Then she got up, went to the small shelf where she kept her writing materials, and wrote 4 words on a strip of clean parchment. She folded it, walked back outside, and handed it to the waiting rider. He read it, nodded once, remounted, and left. Petra, who had appeared at the garden gate at some point during all of this with a basket of early vegetables and an expression of barely contained explosion, waited until the rider was fully out of sight before she said anything. "What did you write?" she asked. "That I would be available," Lily said. Petra set the basket down on the wall. "Lily, the Alpha King is riding 2 hours out of his way to speak with you. He said it was an inspection route." "The inspection route," Petra pointed generally northward, "through the Eastern Territories, where nothing of strategic significance has happened in 30 years. She looked at Lily with the focused intensity she usually reserved for things she considered matters of great importance. "He rode the long way, Lily." Lily picked up the basket and carried it toward the house. "Help me with the vegetables. 9 days. She did not spend them waiting. She spent them working, because work was the most honest thing she knew, and because 9 days of anticipation without occupation would have made her into someone she did not want to be. She helped her father sort the boundary documentation. She finished 2 mending commissions for a family in the village. She repaired the cracked window frame herself with a borrowed chisel and putty, because it had needed doing for 2 years, and waiting for someone else to do it had clearly not been the solution. Petra visited every day, which was not unusual, but now visited with an agenda, which was slightly more unusual. She asked questions Lily answered partially. She made observations Lily acknowledged minimally. She was, in the way of very good friends, completely impossible and entirely necessary. On the 8th night, Lily took the mist-colored dress out of the bottom of her pack. She did not put it on. She just held it for a moment in the candlelight, running her thumb along one of the side seams where the stitching was particularly fine. 3 weeks of work in her hands. The memory of hope, and then the memory of what hope had cost her. And then something else, something newer and less defined, that she was still learning the shape of. She hung it on the wall peg and went to sleep. He came in the late afternoon of the 9th day, not with a procession, not with banners or advance riders or the ceremonial display that would have been entirely within his rights as Alpha King. He came with 4 guards and his brother Dorian, and the kind of deliberate quietness that she was beginning to understand was characteristic of him. The choice to take up exactly the space that was needed, and not 1 inch more. Lily was in the front garden when they arrived. She did not go inside to change or arrange herself, because she had decided at some point in the previous 9 days that she would meet him as she was, in her plain working dress, and with her hair only half pinned, because if this was to mean anything at all, it would have to begin honestly. He dismounted and dismissed the guards with a gesture and walked toward her, and she noticed again that quality of movement, the unhurried precision of it, the sense that each step was chosen. He stopped at a respectful distance. "Lily of the eastern boundary," he said. "My lord," she said. A pause. His amber eyes moved across her face with that reading quality she had first seen in the corridor of the stone hall, the sense of someone taking in more than the surface of a thing. "You wrote that letter yourself," he said. "My father's name is on it." "Your father's name is on it," he agreed. "You wrote it." She held his gaze. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Why did you know Article 7 of the Northern Land Accord?" It was not the question she had expected. She had prepared, in her mind, for several possible opening directions, and this was not one of them. "I read the accord," she said. "When my father's appeal was denied 11 years ago, I read everything I could find. I wanted to understand what the rules were. And when you understood the rules, I waited for the right moment to use them." Something moved in his expression, not the territory before a smile this time. Something quieter and more considered. "You waited 11 years, he said. "I waited until there was a gathering where the right correspondence might be noticed," she said. "I sent it to the wrong address, which was an error. But the letter itself was not." Dorian, standing several feet behind his brother with his arms crossed and the expression of a man watching something he found very entertaining, made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Aiden did not look at him. "No," Aiden said. "The letter itself was not an error." They stood in the garden in the late afternoon light, with the smell of pine and turned earth around them, and the distant sound of her father moving inside the house, and Lily felt the ember in her chest doing that thing again, the thing she had not given it permission to do, the thing she was no longer certain she wanted to stop. "Why did you come here?" she said. Not accusatory. Genuine. He looked at her for a moment before answering, and she had the sense that he was being careful with the answer. Not evasive, but precise, the way he was precise about everything. "At the gathering," he said, "you were publicly humiliated by a man who had made you a promise. You left without breaking. You moved through a corridor carrying wine 2 hours later, as though the world owed you nothing and you owed it nothing either." He paused. "And then you looked at me directly." "That was likely disrespectful," she said. "It was remarkable," he said simply. The wind moved through the pines. Somewhere behind her, the repaired window frame held against it. "The letter told me what you are capable of when you have time to prepare," he continued. "I wanted to know what you are like without it." Lily looked at him, the alpha king of 19 packs, standing in her father's front garden in plain riding clothes, asking her who she was without ceremony or performance. "And?" she said. The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. "Consistent," he said. Behind him, Dorian gave up entirely on suppressing the laugh. The visit lasted 3 hours. Aiden did not stay for a meal, though Gareth, who had appeared at the door approximately 4 minutes after the Alpha King's arrival, with the expression of a man trying to remain calm, while the entire architecture of his understanding of his daughter rearranged itself, had offered one with quiet dignity. Aiden declined politely and without condescension, which Lily noted and filed away beside all the other things she was noting and filing away about him. They walked the boundary line instead. It had been Lily's suggestion, practical and slightly deflecting, because standing in the garden while her father watched from the window and Dorian watched from the fence post with unconcealed interest was a situation that benefited from movement. Aiden had agreed without hesitation, and the 4 guards had repositioned at a distance that was protective without being intrusive. And Dorian had stayed behind with a theatrical sigh that suggested he had been robbed of something. The boundary line ran along the eastern edge of the property, marked by old stones half swallowed by moss and a line of birch trees that had been old when Lily was born. The late afternoon light came through the birches at a low angle, turning everything amber, and the ground was soft from recent rain, and they walked along it with 2 feet of space between them and talked. Not about the land, not primarily. He asked about the books she had used to teach herself the formal language of petitions. She told him about the traveling merchant who came through Halvanmore twice a year and occasionally carried texts, and about the lending arrangement she had made with the village record keeper, who had more documentation than he had shelf space, and was grateful for anyone who treated old paper with care. He listened in the way that people who genuinely listen do, without preparing the next thing to say while she was still speaking. It was, she thought, one of the rarest things she had ever encountered in another person. She asked him, because she had decided on honesty, why a man of his position attended to a misdirected land petition personally. "I don't, usually," he said. "But you did." "The letter was unusual," he said. "And then you were unusual. The 2 things connected." "I wrote a land petition," she said. "It isn't particularly unusual." "You wrote a land petition using self-taught formal language with no errors after 11 years of waiting for the correct moment. Signed it with your father's name so the request would be taken seriously rather than dismissed as coming from a woman with no clan standing, and addressed it to the highest administrative office in the territory, whether by accident or not." He glanced at her briefly. "It is, in fact, entirely unusual." Lily was quiet for a moment. "The address was an accident." "Was it?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "I'm not certain," she admitted, and was surprised to find it was true. Somewhere in the back of her mind, in the part that had read the Northern Land Accord cover to cover at the age of 14, had she known that the regional office in Halvanmore had a history of losing petitions from minor Beta families? Had she known that the Crown Correspondence Office had a mandate to review anything that reached it? She had told herself it was an error. She had believed it was an error. Perhaps she had simply been too accustomed to not believing herself capable of strategy. Aiden said nothing to that, but the quality of his silence was warm, which was something she had not previously understood. Silence could be. When they returned to the front of the house, the light had dropped further, and the air had taken on the particular cold clarity that came just before dark in the Eastern Territories. Dorian was sitting on the fence post eating an apple that he had almost certainly taken from the garden tree without asking, and he dropped down when they approached with the energy of someone who had been patient for as long as he intended to be. "Well," he said, looking between them with transparent interest. "Productive walk." "Go back to the horses, Dorian," Aiden said. "I'm just asking." "Dorian." Dorian went, with the unhurried compliance of a younger brother who had achieved his conversational goal and no longer needed to press the point. Aiden turned to Lily. They stood at the gate, and the last of the amber light was behind him. And she looked at him directly the way she had in the corridor, and the way she had in the garden, because she had found she could not do anything else with him. "I would like to continue this," he said. Simple. No performance. No assumption that the answer was obvious. "What does continuing this look like?" she said, "given the distance and the difference in our positions?" "It looks like letters first," he said. "Correspondence, which you are evidently capable of, and then visits when the route permits. And then whatever comes after that, when we both know enough to decide." "That's a very measured approach," she said. "I'm a measured person," he said. Then, with the slight shift at the corner of his mouth that she had learned in one afternoon, was as close as he usually came to open expression. "The letter reached me," I replied. "You said stay right there." He paused. "I'm asking if you meant it." Lily looked at him for a long moment. "I meant it," she said. The letters came every 10 days, and Lily answered every one. His were precise and observational, full of the kind of detail that a man who moved through the world watching everything quietly would naturally accumulate. a description of the stone quarry near the third boundary post that had been operating for 200 years and still used the original pulley system. The particular way the northern packs conducted their winter assembly, standing rather than seated, which he found more honest. A question about the birch trees on her boundary line and whether she had ever counted them. She had. There were 43. Her letters were, she slowly realized as she wrote them, the first place in her life where she said things as completely as she thought them. There was no social consequence to calculate, no clan standing to protect, no version of herself to manage. She wrote to him about the merchant's texts, and about her father's silence, and about Petra's increasingly dramatic commentary on the situation. She wrote about the mist-colored dress, and what it had meant, and what the night of the gathering had cost her, not bitterly, but honestly, because he had earned honesty, and she had found she could not give him anything less. He wrote back about the War of Three Rivers, about the weight of decisions made at speed and lived with slowly, about the specific loneliness of rooms full of people who wanted something from you before you had finished speaking. She read those letters more than once. Connor Voss appeared at the eastern boundary on a cold morning 3 months after the gathering, without announcement, on a horse that suggested an impulsive departure. He looked older than she remembered, or perhaps just less certain, which amounted to the same thing. Lily was at the woodpile when he arrived. She set down the axe and looked at him. "I heard," he said, and then stopped, which told her that he had not prepared beyond those 2 words. "What did you hear?" she said. "About the Alpha King." His jaw worked. "About the correspondence, about the visits." "Then you heard correctly," she said. He was quiet for a long moment. The cold morning sat between them, and the birch trees were bare now, and the boundary stones were visible through the thin winter ground cover. "I made a mistake," he said. "Yes," she said, simply, not cruelly. "Lily." "Connor." She looked at him with the same steadiness she had shown him the morning after the gathering, in the courtyard, eating bread with flour-free hands. "You made the choice that made sense to you at the time, given what you valued and what you were willing to protect. That's done. I don't carry it badly. I could—" "No," she said, not unkindly. "You couldn't." He left, and she watched him go with the clear, unclouded feeling of a door that had been slightly ajar finally closing all the way, not with force, but with the quiet inevitability of things settling into their true position. Aiden came back in the spring, this time with more ceremony, because ceremony at a certain point became unavoidable, but he had sent a letter ahead warning her of it so that she would not be caught unprepared, which she thought was very like him. He came with his brothers, both of them, and with the representatives of the 3 largest packs of the Northern Territories, and he came with the formal proposal that would, if she accepted, make her the bonded companion of the Alpha King and place her at the head of a household that governed 19 packs. He delivered the formal portion of it in front of everyone, because that was what the occasion required. And then he waited. Lily stood in the front garden in the mist-colored dress, which she had taken out of the pack and pressed carefully the night before, and she looked at him across the assembled witnesses and the spring light and the 43 birch trees at the boundary line, and she thought about 11 years of waiting and a letter sent to the wrong address and amber eyes in a torchlit corridor. "Yes," she said. Dorian made a sound that was absolutely a cheer, which the situation did not formally call for, and Cale, the youngest brother, laughed outright and did not bother to conceal it. The pack representatives exchanged glances of the kind that would become stories. Gareth, standing at the door of the house with both hands on the frame, bowed his head once and said nothing. But his jaw did the thing it had done twice before, and this time Lily understood it was not grief and not old humiliation. It was relief. Petra was made head of household correspondence by personal appointment, a role she accepted with an enthusiasm that suggested she had been waiting for exactly this kind of authority her entire life. She was, as it turned out, extraordinarily good at it. Her letters were precise, occasionally devastating, and always accurate, and within 2 years the correspondence office ran more efficiently than it had in a generation. Gareth received his formal deed within 60 days of the survey as promised. He planted a new garden the following spring, larger than the old one, with a proper border and staked rows. He did not say much about it, but he tended it with the careful attention of a man who had finally been given something worth protecting. Aidan and Lily built what they had said they would build, piece by piece, in the measured way of people who had both learned the cost of things promised too quickly. The northern court was large and cold and full of people who wanted something before you had finished speaking. And she learned its rhythms the way she had learned everything, by reading everything she could find, and then waiting for the right moment. The pacts were not always easy. The politics were rarely simple. There were nights when the weight of it sat heavily on both of them. On those nights, Aidan would find her in the correspondence room, still at her desk, and he would stand in the doorway the way he had stood at the window in the stone hall corridor, quiet and unhurried, and she would look up, and the ember in her chest would do what it had been doing since a cold morning in a front garden. It would hold. She was 24 years old when she had walked into the grand gathering in a mist-colored dress she had sewn herself, carrying hope like something fragile, and had it broken in public by a man who did not know what he was holding. She was 25 when the Alpha King stood in her father's garden and asked her who she was without ceremony or performance. And she was 26 when she understood, fully and without reservation, that the wrong address had been the most precise thing she had ever done. Some letters find exactly where they are meant to go. This one had.